Rain streaked down the window, distorting the glow of the street lamps outside. Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The smell of burnt toast lingered in the air, a remnant of a morning he hadn't been able to finish. A photo lay on the table, his ex-wife, smiling with the man she'd left him for. He told himself he was over it. He told himself he didn't care anymore. But the silence in the house told the truth. It wasn't just about losing her. It was about losing the man he used to be. Daniel had been a single dad for 3 years, raising his 8-year-old daughter Lily with every ounce of strength he could muster. His life was predictable: work, school runs, homework, dinners, bedtime stories, and then the quiet. Always the quiet. Friends had pushed him to get back out there. But the idea of dating felt like walking barefoot over shattered glass. Still, on a lonely Tuesday night, he found himself agreeing to a blind date arranged by a well-meaning colleague. When the knock came at the door, Daniel's heart raced. He smoothed his shirt, took a deep breath, and opened it, only to freeze. A woman stood there, rain dripping from her hair, a tentative smile on her lips. "Hi, I'm Claire," she said softly. Then, before he could respond, she added, "My kids are waiting in the car." The words hit him like a wave. Kids. Plural. The memory of his ex leaving, taking half his world with her, came roaring back. He smiled politely, masking the storm inside. "Oh, sure. Let's go," he said, his voice betraying none of the ache in his chest. As they walked toward her car, he told himself this was nothing. Just dinner. Just two people trying to fill an empty evening. But deep down, he felt something shifting, a discomfort he wasn't ready to name. The evening unfolded in a small Italian restaurant, the kind where the candles flicker too much and the bread is always warm. Claire's 2 children, a shy boy named Evan and an outspoken little girl named Sophie, chattered between bites of pasta. Lily, sitting beside Daniel, laughed more than he'd heard in weeks. At first, Daniel kept his guard up, speaking only when spoken to, letting Claire fill the silence. But then something unexpected happened. Sophie spilled her water, and instead of scolding, Claire knelt beside her, smiling gently. "It's just water, sweetheart. We'll get more." Daniel watched her, stunned. He remembered the way arguments over small mistakes used to escalate in his past marriage. He remembered feeling like he was always one wrong move away from failure. As dessert came and the kids shared spoons of chocolate mousse, Claire looked at him. "You're a good dad," she said quietly. Daniel almost laughed, but there was no mockery in her eyes, only sincerity. And for the first time in years, he let himself believe maybe, just maybe, she was right. 2 weeks passed. What started as one awkward evening turned into park visits, movie nights, and chaotic family dinners where laughter replaced the old, heavy silences. Daniel noticed changes in himself, small, almost invisible ones. He no longer stared at that photo on the table. He no longer felt like every choice was a test he was destined to fail. One Sunday afternoon, as they all stood in Claire's driveway, Sophie ran up to him with a handmade card. In crayon, she'd written, "You make things feel safe." He swallowed hard, blinking away the sting in his eyes. For years, he'd been trying to heal by closing himself off, telling himself that if he avoided connection, he'd avoid pain. But now, he understood. The only way to truly heal was to let life back in, messy as it was. That night, after putting Lily to bed, Daniel stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "I'm ready." It was late on a Thursday evening when Daniel found himself alone in the kitchen again. The house was quiet. Lily was at a sleepover, and Claire had taken Sophie and Evan home after a long day at the park. Normally, the silence would have pressed in on him, heavy and cold. But tonight, it felt different. It wasn't loneliness anymore. It was space he could fill with something new. He sat at the table with a cup of tea, the same spot where months ago he had stared at a photo and felt his heart twist. The photo was gone now, tucked away in a box in the attic. He hadn't meant to get rid of it that day, but something in him had whispered, "It's time." His phone buzzed. It was a message from Claire, "Can you talk?" A tiny spark of worry flickered in his chest. He called her immediately. When she answered, her voice was quiet. "I wanted to tell you something," she began, and he braced himself without even realizing it. "Tonight, Evan asked me if you were going to be around for a long time. The word struck him in a way he didn't expect. He pictured Evan, soft-spoken, thoughtful, looking up at his mom with those uncertain eyes. What did you say? Daniel asked, his voice low. I told him I don't know the future, Claire replied gently. But I do know you're someone who cares, and you're here now. And that matters. Daniel swallowed, his throat tight. He didn't know what he had been expecting, a casual remark, maybe a light-hearted joke, but not this. Not the weight of someone else's trust placed so carefully in his hands. You know, Claire continued after a pause, I wasn't sure about dating again either. I thought I was too damaged to build something good. But then I saw you with Lily. I saw how you listen to her, how you make her feel safe. And I realized, maybe what we've been through doesn't have to be the end of the story. Maybe it's the start of a better one. Daniel felt something in him shift, the way ice cracks when spring begins to thaw it. For so long, he'd been afraid of letting anyone close. Not just for his sake, but for Lily's. He had told himself he was protecting her, but now he saw it clearly. He had been protecting himself from the possibility of more heartbreak. Claire, he said slowly, I've been living like the best parts of my life were behind me. And meeting your kids, it's like someone opened a window in a room I didn't even realize was suffocating me. I don't want to go back to closing it again. There was a long silence on the line. Then Claire said softly, I don't either. A week later, Daniel invited Claire and her kids over for dinner. He cooked spaghetti, the only meal he knew he couldn't mess up, and Lily insisted on setting the table fancy, with candles and cloth napkins. As they sat together, the house felt alive in a way Daniel hadn't felt in years. Evan told a story about a science experiment gone wrong at school. Sophie interrupted him twice, giggling. Lily leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder when she thought no one was watching. Midway through the meal, Claire reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. It was a small gesture, but it sent a quiet current through him, not of excitement, but of calm. The kind of calm that told him he was exactly where he was supposed to be. After dinner, the kids played a board game in the living room while Daniel and Claire stood in the doorway, watching. You know, Claire said, this isn't easy. Blending lives, opening old wounds, it takes courage. Daniel smiled faintly. I don't know if it's courage. I think maybe it's just deciding that the pain of holding back is worse than the risk of trying again. She nodded, her eyes warm. Either way, I'm glad you decided. That night, after everyone had gone home and Lily was asleep, Daniel stepped outside onto the porch. The air was cool, and the scent of rain still clung to the grass. He thought about the man he'd been the night he met Claire, hesitant, guarded, convinced he had nothing left to give. Now, he understood that healing hadn't been about finding someone to fix him. It had been about allowing himself to be seen, flaws and all, and realizing he was still worthy of love. As he looked up at the stars, he thought about Evan's question, will you be around for a long time? And for the first time, he felt ready to answer it. Not with promises he couldn't control, but with the quiet certainty that he was showing up, every day, with an open heart. And maybe that was enough. Winter had crept in quietly that year, laying a soft frost over the neighborhood lawns. Daniel stood in his driveway, scraping ice from his windshield, his breath clouding the cold air. In the distance, the muffled sound of children laughing drifted from Claire's house. It had been 3 months since that first, awkward dinner. 3 months of tangled schedules, shared meals, and late-night conversations on the phone when the kids were asleep. 3 months of learning each other's unspoken fears and small joys. And yet, tonight felt different. Claire had invited him and Lily over for an early Christmas gathering. She'd said it casually, come by, it'll be fun, but Daniel felt the weight behind her words. It wasn't just an invitation to a holiday party. It was an invitation into her family. Inside her living room, the air smelled of cinnamon and pine. A tree stood in the corner, twinkling with mismatched ornaments, some handmade and crooked. Sophie was on the floor, tying a ribbon around the dog's neck, while Evan and Lily tried to build the tallest possible tower out of Legos. Claire was in the kitchen, pulling cookies from the oven, her hair falling in loose strands from a messy bun. Daniel paused in the doorway, just watching. For years, holidays had been something he endured, a reminder of the life he'd lost. But now, in this small, noisy, imperfect house, he felt something he hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Belonging. After dinner, Claire gathered everyone in the living room. "All right, before we open presents, I want to start a new tradition," she announced. "We go around and say one thing we're grateful for this year." The kids went first. Evan said he was grateful for video games that actually work. Sophie said she was grateful for cookies and not having to eat broccoli tonight. Lily grinned and said, "I'm grateful for having more friends now." Then it was Daniel's turn. He hesitated, his throat tightening. All eyes were on him, waiting. "I'm grateful," he began slowly, "for second chances. For the kind you don't see coming until they're right in front of you." His gaze shifted to Claire, who was smiling softly. "And I'm grateful for the people who make the world feel like home again." A silence hung in the room, not uncomfortable, but warm, the kind that lets words settle in deep. Later, when the kids were distracted by their new gifts, Daniel found himself standing beside Claire at the kitchen counter. She handed him a mug of hot chocolate, her fingers brushing his. "You know," she said quietly, "when we first met, I didn't think we'd get here." He chuckled. "Neither did I. I was scared," she admitted. "Not just for me, but for the kids. I didn't want to let someone in and then have them leave." Daniel looked down into his mug, the steam rising between them. "I get that. I was scared too. For Lily. For me. I thought if I stayed on my own, I couldn't lose anyone again." He paused, then looked up at her. "But I was wrong. I was already losing something life. I was letting it pass me by." Claire's eyes softened. "And now?" He smiled, small but certain. "Now I want to be in it. All of it. The mess, the noise, the late-night talks, the bad days, the good days, all of it." As the evening wound down, Claire walked Daniel and Lily to the door. Sophie and Evan ran ahead to wave from the window as they left. Just before Daniel stepped outside, Claire touched his arm. "I can't promise it'll always be easy," she said. Daniel took her hand, holding it gently. "I don't want easy. I want real." For a moment, they just stood there, the quiet hum of the house behind them, the cold night air swirling around. Then Claire smiled, and he knew. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Driving home, Lily dozed in the back seat, clutching the stuffed animal Sophie had given her. Daniel glanced at her in the rearview mirror, then back at the road ahead. For years, he'd been driving through life looking in the rearview, replaying what went wrong, what was lost. But tonight, for the first time, he kept his eyes forward. The road wasn't perfectly lit. There would be turns he couldn't see yet, maybe even storms ahead. But he wasn't afraid anymore. Because sometimes, the most important choice you can make isn't about where you're going. It's about who you're willing to walk beside on the way. And Daniel knew, with a quiet, steady certainty, that he had made his choice. Moral of the story: when life breaks your heart, it's tempting to close the door for good. But healing comes when you dare to open it again and discover that love, in its imperfect and unexpected ways, can be the most beautiful second chance of all.